They say the Mariani family built their empire on 3 things: silence, blood, and brides. I was always meant to be one of those brides. My father decided that when I was 19, he told me over a Sunday dinner, meatballs steaming, red wine breathing in crystal glasses, my mother's eyes fixed on her plate like she already knew, like she'd been carrying the weight of it for weeks. He announced it the way he announced everything. As fact, as done, I was to marry Marco Mariani, the younger one, the handsome one, the one who laughed too loud and kissed my hand at family gatherings and made it all feel manageable, safe. Even no one mentioned Dante. No one ever mentioned Dante Mariani unless they had to. It was the kind of name you said quietly, carefully, like a prayer you weren't sure would be answered. He was 10 years older than his brother, 6 feet of controlled silence, and the true architect of everything the Mariani name had become. He was also the reason 3 men had disappeared from the east side in the last month. I knew better than to look at him, knew better than to think about him, knew better than to notice the way he watched me from across the room at every family dinner. Still dark, unreadable, like I was a problem he was slowly solving. Knew all of that, and yet the Conti house on Sunday mornings smelled like espresso and obligation. Sienna set the table, because that was what she did. She folded napkins into perfect triangles, aligned silverware with the precision of a woman who had learned that perfection was the only armor she was allowed. Her younger sisters moved noisily around her, Lucia laughing at something on her phone, Gabriella stealing bread from the basket, and Sienna simply moved around them, quiet as water, finding its level. She was the eldest Conti daughter, the guide run, the one who never raised her voice or her skirter, who got her degree in art history because it was beautiful and useless and wouldn't threaten anyone, who came home on weekends and helped her mother in the kitchen and sat through dinners where men talked over her and smiled, like it didn't cost her anything, it cost her everything. But no one knew that. She'd made sure of it. Sienna, her father's voice came from the doorway. Carmine Conti was a broad, silver-haired man who wore his authority like a second skin. He'd built his shipping business from nothing, or so he claimed. Sienna had learned, slowly and without wanting to, that his business had always had a silent partner, that the silence had a name, that the name was Mariani. "They're coming for dinner Thursday," he said. She kept folding napkins. "Who?" "The Marianis." He paused, and in the pause she heard everything he wasn't saying. "Marco will be there. I'll make sure there's enough wine," she said. Her father's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "Gidgel." She waited until he left to press her palm flat against the table and breathe. Marco Mariani was not a bad man. She'd told herself that many times, carefully, like stacking stones. He was charming in the way of men who'd never been told no. He sent flowers without being asked. He was 28 and looked like a Renaissance painting, and had once, at a family gathering, told her she was different from other girls, which she understood to mean quiet and compliant, and therefore convenient that she could survive. Marco dot. It was Thursday that she didn't know how to survive, because Thursday meant the Marianis, plural. Thursday meant Dante would be in her house. He arrived last. Of course he did. The others were already seated, her father at the head, Marco beside Sienna's empty chair, the 2 family consigliere on the far end, talking football loudly over the centerpiece. Her mother was in the kitchen. Her sisters had been sent upstairs, which told Sienna everything about what kind of dinner this actually was. Then the door opened, and the room changed. She felt it before she saw him, a shift in pressure, subtle as a storm front rolling in. Marco sat up straighter. Her father set down his glass. Even the consigliere quieted. Dante Mariani walked in, wearing a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than her car, and he looked at the room the way a man looks at something he already owns. His eyes found her. Immediately! Not Marco's fiancée, not Carmine's daughter, her Sienna. As if the rest of the room was furniture. She looked down at her plate. Dante, Her father stood. There was something in his voice she didn't like, a deference that sat wrong, that made her stomach tighten. Carmine Conti did not defer to people. Dante's voice was low. On her, he shook her father's hand and let his gaze move around the table with the efficiency of a man cataloging exits. When it landed on her again, she made herself look up, made herself meet it. He had dark eyes. Not warm, dark, cold dark. The kind of dark that lived at the bottom of deep water. His jaw was hard, and there was a scar through the left edge of his brow, thin as a seam that she'd never noticed from across rooms before. Up close, it made him look dangerous in a way that was almost beautiful. Almost. "Dot goes, Miss Conti," he said. "Mr. Mariani," she said back. "Leva, steady." Something moved in his expression. Not a smile. Too small for that. But something. He took his seat at the opposite end of the table and didn't look at her again for the rest of the first course. She noticed every moment he didn't. Marco leaned toward her during the soup. "You look lovely tonight," he murmured, and she turned to him with a smile she kept ready for occasions like this. Warm enough to be convincing. Shallow enough to cost her nothing. "Thank you. Marco?" "I was thinking," he said, swirling his wine, "we could announce the engagement properly next month. My mother wants a party at the estate." "That sounds lovely," she said. Across the table, Dante reached for his glass. His eyes moved to her over the rim. She looked away first. She found the garden because she needed air. The dinner had stretched into its third hour. Her father and Dante speaking in the low, deliberate tones of men negotiating things she wasn't meant to understand. Marco refilling his wine more often than was wise. The consigliere gone home. Her mother had finally come out of the kitchen and was performing. Graciousness with the precise weariness of a woman who had been performing it for 30 years. Sienna excused herself quietly, the way she did everything, and slipped through the back door into the night. The garden was her mother's obsession. Roses trained along iron trellises, a stone bench beneath an old olive tree, fairy lights strung between the posts in a way that was more hope than plan. Sienna sat on the bench and tilted her head back and looked at the sky and let herself, just for a moment, be no one's anything. She heard him before. She saw him. Not his footsteps. He was too controlled for that. She heard the shift of air, the faint scent of cedar, and something darker underneath it. She turned. Dante stood at the edge of the garden, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He looked at her the way he had across the dinner table. Direct, unhurried. "I didn't know anyone was out here," she said. "I did," he said. She stared at him. He stepped closer, not toward her, toward the edge of the trellis, and lit the cigarette there. Exhaling slowly into the dark. "You've been watching me all night," he said. Not accusing, just stating. "You've been watching me," she said, before she could stop herself. He turned his head. The fairy lights caught the edge of his jaw, the scar at his brow. He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt it everywhere. That looked like fingers pressed against a bruise. "Yes," he said simply. "I have." She should have gone inside. She knew that. Every sensible part of her, every carefully built wall, every practiced deflection said, "Get up, go back. Forget this conversation is happening." She stayed, she asked. He took another pull from the cigarette. "Because you're the most interesting person at that table, and you've spent the entire evening making yourself invisible." Something cracked open in her chest. Small, like a hairline fracture. Marrying your brother," she said. No." He dropped the cigarette, crushed it underfoot, and looked at her one more time with those bottom-of-deep-water eyes. "Get inside before someone notices you're gone." He went in first. She sat there for another 5 minutes, pressing her hand to her sternum like she could push. The fracture closed. She couldn't. The engagement party was held at the Mariani estate in late October, when the grounds were gold and copper and the air smelled of wood smoke and money. 200 people. champagne in crystal flutes, a quartet playing something tasteful in the corner of the ballroom, Sienna in a deep burgundy dresser. Mother had chosen because it was modest and appropriate and beautiful in a way that was clearly someone else's idea. She stood beside Marco and smiled until her face ached. "You'll love it here," Marco said, sweeping his arm toward the estate's interior. "We'll redecorate the east wing. Make it yours, whatever you want." "You don't have to do that," she said. "I want to." He looked at her with genuine warmth, and that was the hardest part about Marco. He did want to. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He was simply a man who would never have to consider whether someone wanted what he was offering. "Thank you," she said. He was pulled away by a cousin, and she breathed. The ballroom was enormous, and she felt very small in it, which was unusual, because she was used to making herself small. This was different. This was the particular smallness of standing inside someone else's world and understanding that you were being absorbed into it. That these walls, this family, this name, was becoming the shape of her life. She drifted toward the windows. "You look like you're calculating the drop," she startled. Turned, Dante stood 3 feet away, a glass of something amber in one hand. Watching her with that expression, she was beginning to recognize the one that wasn't quite anything, but contained everything. "I was looking at the garden," she said. "The drop to the garden is about 12 feet, he said. "Not fatal, but you'd turn an ankle." "I wasn't." She stopped. He was almost smiling. "Almost." "You're not funny," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." She turned back to the window. She felt him step closer. Not touching, just closer, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him, despite the air between them. "How are you, really?" he said. The question hit her wrong. Too direct. Too fine, she said. "It's a lovely party." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He was watching her with something that wasn't calculation anymore, something quieter, more dangerous than calculation, something that looked almost like concern. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like that." "Not here." "Not." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "This is your brother's engagement party. I'm your brother's fiancé. I know what you are," he said. The words sat between them like a lit match. "Then act like it," she said, and walked away before her hands could shake. She didn't look back. She knew he watched her go. She found out about Marco's other woman 6 weeks before the wedding. Not from Marco. Not from anyone in the family. She found out the way women in these circles always found out sideways. Accidentally, through a conversation that stopped when she walked into the room. Through a look exchanged between two cousins at a lunch she hadn't been meant to attend. She put it together quietly, efficiently, the way she did everything. Her first instinct was grief, not for the relationship, which had always been more arrangement than romance, but for the version of this she'd been willing to settle for. The manageable version. The bearable version. She'd been prepared to give her life the bearable, and now bearable had been taken. To Dot, her second instinct was fury. She didn't act on either. She went home, sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by art history, textbooks, and old photographs, and thought about what her options actually were. She could tell her father. He would be angry at Marco, possibly, but more at the disruption to the arrangement. She could confront Marco. He would apologize and probably cry, and nothing would change. She could say nothing and walk into that church and become a wife to a man who kept another woman 2 neighborhoods away. Dot, she didn't let herself finish that thought. The call came at 11 that night. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Conti. She knew his voice immediately. That low, controlled register. "Dante, how did you get this number?" she said. "I need to speak with you. In person. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The cafe on Mercer Street." "I don't think I know about Marco," he said. Silence. "9 o'clock," he said again, and the line went dead. She stared at the ceiling for a long time after. She told herself she wouldn't. "Go!" She went. He was already there when she arrived. Of course he was. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place that existed in the margins of the city. No tourists, no pretense, just old wood and good coffee and a barista who clearly knew Dante well enough not to make conversation. He sat at the back table with an espresso and a newspaper he wasn't reading, and when she walked in, his eyes came up and stayed. She sat across from him without being asked. "How long have you known?" she said. "Long enough does he know, you know?" "No." He turned the espresso cup in his hands. The only restless thing about him. "He won't, unless you decide to tell him." "Why are you telling me?" He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was different from candlelight, from a soft glow of garden fairy lights. It was clear and unforgiving, and it showed her things about his face she hadn't seen before. The tiredness around his eyes, the way his jaw held tension even when the rest of him was still. "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into," he said. "Or out of," she said. Something moved in his expression. "Or out ye have." She looked at the table. "My father will be your father's position with our family. Doesn't change regardless of what you decide. I'll see to that." She looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do. That's not." She stopped. Started again. "Men like you don't do things because they're right. You do things because they serve you." He didn't flinch. "Maybe they serve me here too." The words landed with precision. She felt them settle into her, felt the weight of what he wasn't saying, the architecture of it, the thing that had been building since a garden in September. "Don't," she said, softly this time. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You're doing everything," she said. "And you know it." He looked at her, and for one unguarded moment, she saw it something raw and real and carefully contained behind those dark eyes, something that looked like it cost him. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She thought about the church, the burgundy dress her mother had chosen, Marco's genuine, insufficient warmth, the woman 2 neighborhoods away. "I want to be angry," she said, "for a little while, before I decide anything." Hinadad. "Okay. Okay. Take your time." She looked at him. This man who was supposed to be peripheral to her story, a shadow at the edge of someone else's narrative, and felt something shift irrevocably in her, understanding of how the next year of her life was going to go. "You're not what I expected," she said. "You're exactly what I expected," he said. "That's the problem." She left without finishing her coffee. She thought about him the entire way home. She didn't call off the engagement, not yet. Instead, she lived in the suspended space between knowing and acting, a place she was familiar with, had lived in most of her life, and she watched things differently, watched Marco differently, watched herself. She also watched for Dante. He appeared at a family dinner 3 weeks later, as he always did, and she understood now why he always sat where he could see the whole room. He was a man who had learned very young that safety was a geometry problem, angles and exits, and the distance between yourself and every threat. She wondered what had taught him that. "You're stare," Lucia whispered beside her. "I'm not. You've been looking at Dante Mariani for 6 minutes. Lucia's voice was amused. "Not that I blame you, but I'm not staring at Dante," Sienna said, and turned to her sister with a smile. Lucia looked unconvinced, but let it go. After dinner, in the brief chaos of desert and conversation, Sienna moved toward the hallway under the pretense of finding the restroom. She was not surprised, was maybe the opposite of surprised, when she turned a corner and found Dante standing there, leaning against the wall, like he'd been waiting. "You could have just looked at me," he said. I wasn't Sienna. It was the first time he'd used her name, not Miss Conti. Her name. It sat in the air between them differently than she expected. Warm, almost gentle, completely at odds with everything about him. She pressed her back against the opposite wall. 2 feet of hallway between them. 2 feet might as well have been nothing. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "I know." "I need you to stop," she gestured vaguely, hopelessly, at the air between them. "Stop. What? This. Whatever this is." Every time you look at me like she stopped, frustrated at the inadequacy of language, at the way he remained so steady while she felt perpetually off balance. "How do I look at you?" he asked. Quietly. Genuinely. She looked at him. "Like I matter," she said. "And I don't know what to do with that." His jaw tightened. "Just barely. You do matter. Not to you. You don't. You don't get to decide that. You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "That's not. I know you fold napkins like the table might fall apart without you. I know you smile with your mouth, but not your eyes. When you're performing comfort, you don't feel. I know you're the most carefully constructed person I've ever met, and I know," he said, his voice dropping, "that there's something underneath all that construction that you don't let anyone see." She stopped breathing. "Stop," she whispered. "You asked." "I know. Stop it." Anyway, he pushed off the wall and walked past her, back toward the dining room. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that she could have reached out and D-I-D-N. Single quotes. She stood in the hallway for a full minute before she trusted her legs. The engagement ended on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. There was no scene. Sienna was very good at not making scenes. She told Marco over coffee at his apartment, a place she'd visited exactly 4 times, always briefly, always in the daylight. She told him she knew. She didn't ask him to explain or deny. She told him she was sorry, and she meant it. And she watched understanding move across his face, followed by relief, actual relief, which told her everything. He hadn't wanted this either. "Sienna!" He started. "Don't," she said gently. "Let's just let it be what it is." Nada. His eyes were wet, which surprised her, and she understood that Marco was a man who had feelings, real ones. He'd just never been taught to put them in the right places. She left his apartment and sat in her car and cried for 20 minutes, not for him, for the clean version of her life she'd been willing to settle for the version of herself who had been prepared to accept comfortable instead of true. She cried for that girl with her practiced smile and her perfect napkin folds and her careful invisibility. Then she dried her face and drove home. Her father took the news with a silence that lasted 2 full days. Her mother made soup. Her sisters orbited her carefully, wide-eyed waiting. She answered questions in the level tones of a woman who had made her decision and wouldn't be shaken from it. The call came on Thursday, same number as before. "Are you all right?" Dante said. Just that. No preamble. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the street below. "I will be..." Did he? No. He was kind, actually. That made it harder. She paused. Are you? Is your family that's handled," he said. "Your father's arrangement stands. You wouldn't have to do that. I told you I would." She pressed her forehead against the glass. Outside, a couple was walking a dog, laughing at something, oblivious to everything. "What happens now?" she asked. Silence. Double quotes. "What do you want to happen?" he said. She closed her eyes. She thought about garden light and morning, cafes and hallways, and the specific weight of being seen by someone who wasn't supposed to see. "You?" "I don't know," she said. "Honestly, he don't know yet." "Okay," he said. "You keep saying that. It keeps being true." She almost laughed. Almost, don't they? She said his name for the first time. It felt strange in her mouth. Real? Yeah. Thank you. For I don't know exactly what. But thank you. You don't owe me thanks. I know. I'm giving it anyway. Another pause. Then, quietly, get some sleep, Sienna. She stayed at the window long after the line went dead. Month passed. Then another. She went back to her life. Her flat in the city. Her part-time work at a small gallery. Her friends who asked cautious questions about the broken engagement and accepted her careful answers. She didn't see Dante. She thought about him with a frequency that alarmed her and did nothing about it. Until the night she walked into a gallery, opening and found him standing in front of a Caravaggio reproduction, studying it with an attention she recognized. She stopped in the doorway. He turned as if he'd felt the moment she arrived, that uncanny stillness shifting to orient toward her, like a compass finding north. He was in black, always in black, and the gallery light did things to the angles of his face, which he tried not to catalog and cataloged anyway. You should know, she said, crossing the room because there was nothing else to do. This is coincidence. I know, he said. I'm not here because of you. Good. I'm here because I was invited. The Giordanos. I work with the Giordanos at the gallery. I know. She stopped beside him. The Caravaggio loomed above them. All shadow and sudden light. All drama and inevitability. Of course you do, she said. Are you angry? No. She looked at the painting. Yes. A little. Not at you, exactly. At what, then? At the fact that I think about you too much for someone I've had 4 conversations with, she said. Bluntly. She was so tired of careful. She felt more than saw him go still beside her. Sienna, don't tell me it's complicated. I know it's complicated. Your family and my family and Marco and all of it is a knot. I can't fully unpick and I'm aware of every single thread. She exhaled. I wanted you to know that it's not one-sided. Whatever this is, it's not one-sided, he said. Simply, I know! She finally looked at him. That doesn't make it simpler. No, he said. It doesn't. He looked at her with those dark eyes, and she felt the full weight of him, the history she didn't know, the danger she couldn't measure, the man who existed underneath all of it. She felt the fracture in her chest from the garden open a little wider. I'm not easy, he said. I won't pretend to be. The life I have, what I've done to have it, none of it, something I can just set down. I know what world you live in. Knowing and living in it are different. Then let me decide that, she said. Quietly, firmly. Stop making decisions about what I can handle. You said I mattered. Act like I'm capable of choosing. He looked at her for a long time. A group of guests moved past them, laughing, glasses raised. The painting above them blazed with its Baroque light and shadow. Have dinner with me, he said finally. Ahiao, one. Not family. Not obligation. Okay, she said. And there it was. The word he always used. She understood now why he said it. Because okay wasn't yes, wasn't surrender. It was a door held open. A question answered honestly. The beginning of something. He took her to a restaurant in the West Village that had no menu. Just a chef who cooked whatever was right that evening. And no other guests on their side of the room. She didn't ask how he'd arranged it. They talked for 3 hours. Dot carefully. That was what surprised her. She'd expected careful, the way all conversations in her world were careful, pruned of anything that could be held against you. Instead, Dante talked about his father, who had been brilliant and brutal and dead for 11 years, about the weight of inheriting an empire at 26, before he was ready, before he'd become whatever it was he'd needed to become to hold it. about the things he'd done in those early years that he'd made peace with and the things he hadn't. She listened the way she did everything completely, without performance. And she told him things too, about the art history degree she'd wanted to be something and became decoration, about the years of making herself small, and how the smallness had grown so habitual. She'd stopped knowing what size she actually was. "What size are you?" he asked. She thought about it. "Bigger than I've been acting," she said. He looked at her across the table with those dark eyes, and something in them was different, warmer than she'd thought him capable of. Careful in a way that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with care. "I need you to understand something," he said, setting down his glass. "Okay. If you're in my life, really in it, there are things that come with that. People who will look at you differently. Decisions you'll find out about that you won't be able to unknow. I'm not." He paused. "I'm not the brother who sends flowers. I won't be uncomplicated. I don't want uncomplicated," she said. "I had uncomplicated. It was someone else's idea of my life." He reached across the table and turned her hand over, not holding it, just touching, palm to palm, his thumbs tracing the line of her wrist. It was the most he'd touched her. It was electric and quiet at the same time. "I've wanted this since September," he said. "The garden?" she said. "Before the garden. The first dinner. You looked at your plate when your father made the announcement, and I watched you decide, in about 10 seconds, to accept it. And I thought," he stopped. "What? That someone should ask what you wanted." She felt something give way in her chest. Not the fracture, something older than that. Something she'd been bracing for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "What do you want?" he said. His thumb stilled against her wrist. She looked Hachiim, the danger and the darkness and the man underneath, both, and made her choice, the way she did everything now. Fully vowed, performance. "You," she said, "I want this. Whatever it is." He closed his hand around hers. "Then you have it," he said. Outside, November rain had started against the windows, soft and relentless. Inside, the chef moved quietly behind the partition. Somewhere in the city, Marco was probably with his other woman, and her father was probably worrying about alliances, and her sisters were probably laughing at something on their phones. And Sienna Conti was sitting in a restaurant in the West Village, with her hand in the hand of the most dangerous man she'd ever met, feeling for the first time in longer than she could name exactly the size she actually was. Spring came to the city the way it always did, reluctantly. Then, all at once, Sienna's gallery was doing well. She'd been given her own exhibition to curate small, emerging artists. Nothing that would set the world on fire, but hers, completely hers. She stayed late most evenings arranging and rearranging, getting it right. Dante came on those evenings sometimes. Not every chimney. He had a life that made demands on him. She was learning to understand rather than fear, but sometimes he'd stand in the gallery in his dark suit, looking at whatever was on the walls with that focused attention he gave to everything. And she'd watch him from across the room and feel the particular warmth of being loved by someone who chose it, deliberately, because that was what it was. Love. That word had arrived without announcement one morning in January, quiet as snow, and she'd held it for a week before she said it. He'd looked at her with those dark eyes and said it back without hesitation, like he'd been carrying it for months. He probably had. The Mariani world was complicated, and she had not romanticized the complications away. There were evenings when men came to the house with hard eyes and quiet voices, and she made herself scarce without being asked. There were mornings when she found Dante at the kitchen table at 4 a.m., with the particular stillness of a man managing something she couldn't see. She didn't pretend those things weren't there. She didn't look away from them either. She had decided. She was allowed to live in her decision. "You're rearranging again," said a voice from the doorway. She turned. Dante leaned against the gallery entrance, jacket over one arm, something that was almost a smile at the corner of his mouth. "The light's wrong on the Ferreira piece," she said. "The light looks fine." You don't curate art. No. He crossed toward her. I know other things. She smiled. Real, unperformed. The kind she'd stopped rationing and let him reach her, and stood in the circle of him in the empty gallery with the spring night outside the windows and the art all around them. Imperfect and important. Come home, he said quietly. 5 minutes, she said. He took her hand instead of arguing. She knew her now, the real size of her, the real shape. He didn't try to make her smaller or larger. She just stayed that, she had learned, was the thing she'd been looking for all along. Not flowers, not an uncomplicated warmth, not someone else's careful arrangement of her life. Just this, just someone who stayed. She moved the Ferrara piece 2 inches to the left, stood back, decided it was right. Then she turned off the gallery lights and went home.